Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Josh Heupel, Tennessee, kicking off fall camp this week. And Dill, I personally don't know anybody higher on this Tennessee program than you are heading into 2024. You're going to get the opportunity to do a couple of different things, right? One, you're going to sell everybody on this Tennessee program heading into 2024. But I think more importantly, you've been very vocal that you envision this Tennessee team as being really one of the more dangerous teams that we see across the country in 2024, kind of going over some storylines that you need to see answered by Tennessee heading into 2024 to kind of become that team during this fall. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Tennessee fans. Obviously, a lot of success on the recruiting trail the last couple of weeks. Been a blast breaking it down. All the support you guys have shown the fellas. It truly does mean a lot. And recruiting is fun to talk about. We got a very dangerous Tennessee team in 2024 to get into as well. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, let's get into really, I think, your first storyline for this Tennessee program. And that's their secondary. Heading into 2024, what do you need to see from this unit during the next couple of weeks in fall camp to make you feel good about this unit heading into the fall?
I mean, fundamentally, I think you want to see them get closer to the level that their front seven is, because I kind of look, everyone knows this defensive line is going to be really good. You see David Hobbs kind of sitting there in the three deep on our lads. That's probably not that far off, and that's not David Hobbs being bad. That's having four really, really good players. So you're deep, you're talented, you have those top end guys now with guys like James Pierce. I think everything on this defense looks like it's going to be really, really good this year. That secondary unit, again, it's been making some strides. You've seen since Tim Banks took over, they've played better football. They've allowed fewer big plays. They're still giving up a fairly high completion percentage. I'm just kind of looking for, can this unit become a little bit more stifling, not play that bend, don't break style, but get on some guys. And I think the one thing I'm looking at is now they finally do have a number one corner that I think you believe is truly one of those real national premier number ones in Jermod McCoy, because he was a baller at Oregon State.
Jermod McCoy is the truth. As a true freshman, now in the Pac-12, where I'll say this, I'm not saying the Pac-12 is better than the SEC, but you saw the passing attacks that we saw in the Pac-12 last year. If you were able to play good football in the Pac-12 as a true freshman at the cornerback spot, I feel good about you coming into the SEC and playing some good football. And Dill, from kind of an outsider's perspective looking in, it looks like Tennessee kind of, filtered out some of the veteran talent in this Tennessee secondary to kind of make way for some really talented young cats coming through the pipeline. Obviously, guys like Ricky Gibson, guys like Jordan Matthews. I think this is a young secondary, but I think it's arguably the most talented secondary that Tennessee has had. I think probably the biggest question you have is, can the young unit kind of come together and play as a quality unit in 2024? That's probably the question you want to see answered during fall camp here.
And that is the big thing. I think in a lot of cases you want to see continuity, but when you're Tennessee and you're trying to flip that secondary around a little bit and make those strides and develop it to being a better unit, not just kind of like a unit that's hanging on a little bit, I think you're kind of right. You're bringing in that new talent, some of like what Heupel's been recruiting. And you've seen, if you've been following Tennessee on the recruiting trail since Heupel took over, they've raised that up a new level. They're kind of recruiting with the big boys. You're seeing guys like Jordan Matthews, Ricky Gibson come in, hopefully be really interesting players. Even a guy like Boo Carter, who I think we'll talk a little bit more about later, very talented, very good spring game, I thought, from him. So I think you're starting to see the individual talent raise up. Again, I think what you want to see is, I did think they did play together as a unit. I think Tim Banks had them coached well. So if he can coach this unit well and they can play well together, I do think the individual talent feels like it's in a far better place.
And I almost think it's almost a culture thing within this Tennessee defense, where you go back 2 to 3 years ago, this Tennessee defense kind of saw itself as just kind of the Robin to the Batman of this Tennessee offense. I don't think it's crazy to say, and hey, I'm a believer in the Tennessee offense, I don't think it's crazy to say that the defense is the strength of this Tennessee program heading into 2024. And you're starting to feel like that unit feels that way too, which I think is really important. Kind of working through this Tennessee defense, at least for me, a fascinating storyline. There's going to be a lot of, national media analysts who kind of from a surface level look at this Tennessee linebacker room and say, it's going to take a step back. You lose your two leading tacklers, one to the NFL, one to the transfer portal. The way I look at this Tennessee linebacker room is I think it gets better, heading into 2024, because not only is Keenan Pili coming back, a guy that we were really excited about, only got to see for a little bit in 2023. You take a look at a guy like Arian Carter. I mean, he might be the most talented linebacker on that Tennessee team, even going back to his true freshman year. And I think there's reason to believe that this linebacker room might even be better than what Tennessee had in 2023.
And that's the big thing you kind of look for, Frank. I mean, Aaron Beasley, no way around it. He's a loss. So he's really, really good for them. Really, really dynamic. But I think Keenan Pili kind of steps in, fills those shoes, and maybe even, again, maybe has a bit of a higher ceiling because he does have a bit more size, maybe a bit more of that, like, top-end athleticism, if you will. I thought that Virginia game, you saw him flying around, playing fast, being really dynamic. I think where they really get better is at that second linebacker spot because I know Herring made a lot of tackles. But at the end of the day, I think there's a reason that he may have moved on. I don't think it was necessarily Tennessee, like, losing a guy they really wanted to not lose. I mean, I get that he was playing okay ball for them, but I think these young guys coming through the pipeline, whether it's Arian Carter, like you mentioned, even a guy like Jeremiah Thielener, I thought played really good in his kind of reserve role, if you will, last year. Caleb Perry, I thought played good. And then look how Fredwin Spillman, I thought another guy who in that spring game kind of showed out. So I think, again, Malik Herring's a bit of a loss to an extent in terms of his production, but I think you do look, you probably have four far higher upsides in that line.
It almost feels kind of similar to the conversation we had about the secondary. And that is, all right, you lose some quote unquote veteran players that, again, we're not dragging these kids. I think they were solid football players for Tennessee in 2023, but you kind of dive into why they might have been transferring out of Tennessee. It is to make way for some young talent.
Make no mistake, Tennessee shouldn't think they're taking a bet. They shouldn't think good is good enough. I think Tennessee is one of those programs. I mean, you hear the analysts say there's no reason they can't be as good as anyone. They have the fan support. They have the administrative support. Now I think they finally have the coaching staff in place that can make it happen. I think Tennessee, again, you're going to filter some guys out because Tennessee can't settle for good. And I think Herring, he was good. He was a good player for them, but he was never going to be an elite player for them again. I think now you have four guys who have very high ceilings.
And what I think excites me the most is I look at these linebackers. What's the best friend of a really good linebacker core? It's really good defensive line. And we're not going to really touch on the defensive line because we don't have many question marks about the defensive line heading into 2024. It is one of the elite defensive lines that we'll see in the entire country, not only with the top-end guys, right? People are going to talk about James Pierce Jr. You mentioned it at the top. You start looking at the 2 and 3 deep and say, this Tennessee team from a depth standpoint, from a talent standpoint, is one of the best units along the line of scrimmage, quite frankly, on both sides that you see in the SEC, something that has held Tennessee back in previous years. Flipping to the offense, and Dill, I think we both agreed this kind of being the biggest storyline for Tennessee on offense, and I think a lot of the Tennessee fans would agree. We'll talk about the quarterback position. No question about that. That being said, I think one of the bigger storylines that I think Tennessee fans know is present, but not necessarily the national media analysts. They're going to talk about Joe Milton and some of the struggles. I thought Tennessee struggled at wide receiver once Brew McCoy went down. I think Josh Heupel probably would agree with that. They go out and get Chris Brazzell coming in from Tulane. Can this wide receiver room take that step in 2024? Kind of remind you back of the wide receiver room we saw in 2022. If you get that, and we get the Nico that we all expect to see, then this offense takes a massive step in 2024.
I think the wide receivers are going to be a big part of that and allowing Nico to kind of be the best version of himself, because I think you're right. That was kind of a storyline that I think probably went underappreciated, and I'm not trying to necessarily defend Joe Milton. Obviously, there's some big consistency issues with him at the college level. But I also don't think they had incredibly great play from that wideout position, as you mentioned, especially after Brew McCoy went down. And obviously, Brew McCoy should be back, should be ready to rock and roll. He, to me, is a very premier number one. I think that size and his ability to catch the ball in traffic, make plays in the red zone, he's a really, really good player. I'm looking for Chris Brazzell to make it happen. I think you kind of looked in that spring game. I thought him and Nico, they felt like they had a good kind of thing going, if you will, good chemistry. Brazzell just does a better job getting open and catching the ball really consistently. And frankly, I think having a really good number two allows Squirrel White to play in a much more conducive role to him being successful, because I'm not sure he's ever going to be a premier two, but I think he can be a really good kind of flex weapon playmaker, if you will.
100% agree. You look at Squirrel White, awesome wide receiver. We all love Squirrel White. he's at his best when he's kind of that wide receiver 3 working out of the slot. And I think you do have truly a really good wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 combo with Chris and Brew on the outside. I'll kind of throw in 2 other names that at least I'm keeping an eye on. One, Dante Thornton Jr. I know you might not be as high on Dante Thornton Jr., which I understand. Now, what excites me about Dante Thornton Jr. is the physical juice. And it's there in a big way. I mean, that is a big body that can run extremely fast vertically down the field. He's going to be a guy that when he's on the football field, if you're a defensive coordinator, you need to highlight because he can change a game really with one play. And then the other guy I'm going to shout out, one of my favorite wide receivers in the 2024 class, Mikey Matthews. I look at this Tennessee wide receiver room and say, I think that takes a massive step in the right direction. Now, at least for me, here's the X factor. We've been kind of saying this. It seems like Tennessee is it's a program, an offense, I should say, that is really conducive to a tight end work in the middle of the field. Now, I think from a personnel standpoint, they've never really had that difference maker at tight end to really make it happen. We talked about it when Deshaun Brown committed to Tennessee over the weekend or flipped his commitment from Oregon. I think this year they might have that guy. Redshirt freshman Ethan Davis, kind of a fascinating kid coming out of the 2023 cycle where he was a legitimate hooper for the duration of his high school career, decides to go the football route. You're talking about a big, fluid athlete that is a very natural pass catcher because of the basketball background. You have another guy in Holden States who we kind of believe in. I think Tennessee wanted to address that tight end position. Can they kind of take that step at the tight end position? Because I think that's just another dimension. You look at all the different ways Tennessee can attack you on offense. If they get a big body that can work the middle of the field, especially with all the wide splits that Tennessee plays, I think that kind of unlocks this offense to another level in 2024.
I kind of agree. I mean, you do have to push your safeties out wide just because that's kind of the base of the Josh Heupel offense, that idea of cover every inch of grass. And then they need a tight end to be able to punish teams that want to play with them and get guys out there towards the boundary where, again, Tennessee kind of likes to work. I think you're totally right. I do think it's going to be really interesting to see if they finally get a tight end involved and have like kind of a big year. And I like Holden Stays. I think he gives them a really nice floor, especially with the fact that you're really comfortable with him as a blocker. And I think Tennessee, you kind of look with this offensive line and Dylan Sampson at the tailback spot, they're going to be a team that's going to run the ball a fair amount. I think people, as much they think Josh Heupel, they think spread. He's a guy who, when he has a good O-line and a good running back, he is not afraid to run the ball a ton. And I think we'll see a lot of that. So I think Holden Stays has a big role in this offense. But I do think Ethan Davis should be a guy who, again, he's got a far higher ceiling, I think, than Holden Stays in terms of his talent, his athleticism, his ability to punish teams for creating bad matches.
As a pass catcher. And I think the big question is, again, Tennessee, you need to block in this Tennessee offense if you're going to be an inline tight end. I think that's probably the big question mark for Ethan Davis, former Hooper, played a lot of split outside during his high school career. Can he come into the SEC year 2 and get it done as an inline blocker? Because that is Tennessee – and that's their bread and butter. As much as people want to talk about the passing attack, I think you're right. Like, they want to run the football. Best part about fall camp, at least for myself, kind of being the recruiting nerd that I am, is kind of picking some breakout players, guys that are maybe going into year 1 or year 2 that can really break out. Though we kind of talked about it on the offensive side of the football, a guy like Mikey Matthews. I would probably shout out Cam Seldon as well. I think Dylan Sampson going to get a lot of the juice in terms of heading into the 2024, and for good reason. Dylan Sampson is one of the better running backs in the SEC. Cameron Seldon's a freak show. I think this is a guy that you look at, a running back too, that can change a game when he touches the football. That's kind of who I'm looking at. Going to the defense, this is where I think it gets fascinating because I think there are a lot of names that you could shout out. Dill, I'll kind of give you the T-box here. I mean, what true freshman, second-year defender do you think takes that step for Tennessee in the 2024 season?
I mean, this is where it gets interesting because I kind of look, I think there's a bunch. I think, as you mentioned, Arian Carter is kind of the one we all really want to see. I think he's got a really good shot to play a lot of ball, really, really high-end talent. And again, I think can make that front seven even more imposing, if you will, than they were last year. But a guy I think is sneaky going to have an interesting year, and to see what type of role he can carve out is Boo Carter. Because I kind of said it. I thought I was watching that spring game, kind of trying to see who these young guys were, get a sense of what Nico's going to be about. And you couldn't ignore that Boo Carter just looked ready. I think really plays that, like that aggressive way I think you want your nickels to play, being aggressive in the run game, being really good in man coverage, being sticky. I'm really, really interested to see if he can carve out a role. Certainly a guy we wanted, Michigan fan over here. Wanted him at Michigan, saw him as like that next Mike Sainristil. I think Tennessee's got a really good one there.
Yeah, we said it when Boo Carter committed to Tennessee. That kid was born to play that nickel role. I think it's a perfect skill set. Now, nickel's a hard place to crack as a true freshman because you have a lot of different responsibilities, not only in coverage, but what you can do in the run game. I think Boo Carter has certainly a chance. The guy I would probably shout out two guys, right? Edwin Spillman, you're a massive fan of him. Jordan Ross. He's a guy that when he committed to Tennessee, he went about 210 pounds, was a basketball player, freak show athlete, but a little undersized. We had some question marks about can he be a year one guy in the SEC. Quickly looking at the roster, heading into fall camp, 240 pounds. Jordan Ross is put together, and if he even has 80% of the juice that he had when he was 210 pounds, that is an elite caliber edge rusher. A guy that probably doesn't play a ton on first and second down because you probably still have the question marks. Can you play physically along the line of scrimmage against the run? But, man, when you have a third and long and you want to get creative in terms of who you're sending after the quarterback, obviously it's headlined by James Pierce Jr. You make no mistake about it, Jordan Ross is a freshman that can get it done as a pass rusher immediately at the SEC level.
This team has potential to throw a crazy amount of talent. You look Jordan Ross, Caleb Herring, really interesting younger guy too. Even Josh Joseph. So I think it's a guy who I kind of think back to. I was like, saw him flash a little bit as a freshman. He's a guy, again, I think would play a lot on a lot of teams. Obviously, Tennessee's been very deep through that defensive line throughout the duration of his career. But I'm kind of looking. They can get really interesting, I think, with their pass rush packages because they have a lot of different defense.
You're seeing it pay off. I remember us having this conversation when Tennessee was rolling on the recruiting trail 12 months ago, 24 months ago. We kept saying, hey, if Josh Heupel continues to stack these classes, it is going to pay off on the football field. And it just seems like in 2024, it's going to pay off for Tennessee on the defensive side of the football. A fascinating team for fall camp because you talk about the amount of young talent that we expect to take that step. It is Tennessee.
And they got that mix of like young talent, but also some real hammers. James Pierce, hammer. Yeah. You look, Dermod McCoy, hammer. Keenan Pili, hammer. Brew McCoy. Their offensive line, pretty much all five across, all hammers. They have a lot of young talent that I think can pop off, but again, not necessarily need to rely on it because I think they still do have a ton of returning pieces that are really, really interesting.
Yeah, we didn't talk about the offensive line, but outside of Lance Hurd, that is an offensive line that was really dang good last year and has played a lot of football together over the last
Lance Hurd just might be the most talented one out of all.
I'm with you. We'll close it there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.